So, hi everyone. I'm Tim Campbell, Aquatic Invasive Species Specialist for University of Wisconsin Sea Grant. Thank you for attending our virtual lake talk. I know that this would be way more fun in a brewery, but don't quite have that option right now. So thank you for choosing to join us from the comfort of, I assume, your home tonight on Zoom. So I'm pretty excited for our talk tonight. We have Chris Litzow with the Great Lakes Community Conservation Corps to share a little bit about some of the programming he has with the Great Lakes CCC. But before we get started, I just wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping notes. So throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, since all of the attendees should be automatically muted, if you can just place your questions in the chat as we go, I think that's a good way to keep track of all the questions, and then I'll be sure to go back through at the end of the presentation to ask all the questions so we don't miss anything. So, feel free to ask any questions, and we'll also try to facilitate a conversation on the chat during the presentation too, if there's anything that we can answer. If you have any technical issues with the webinar, feel free to get in touch with Bonnie or Jennifer, who is also Zoom meetings, or myself for issues. Just put something in the chat and we'll do our best to help you out. And if you didn't hear it when you joined the room, this meeting is being recorded so we can post it for later viewing. So if you have any questions on that or any concerns, feel free to post something in the chat and we can do our best to answer it. So at that, I'll turn it over to Chris, whose presentation tonight is the Tree Army Reboot, updating the legacy of the Civilian Conservation Corps. And I guess to tell you a little bit more about Chris before he does it himself, I've been working with Chris now for I think 3 to 4 years. He can't remember how we initially got connected, but he was really interested in doing some Asian carp outreach with his Corps members, and we're able to connect and get him some Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers materials and some Asian carp materials, and that's really grown into, I think, a great partnership to do some Clean Boats, Clean Waters inspections along some of the Great Lakes landings. They're really filling a need for us at Sea Grant and reaching out to boaters down there, and then I think it's a really valuable program for their Corps members as well, and I think it's grown into a few other programs and partnerships as well with Sea Grant. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about those. So Chris?
Great. Okay, well, thanks, Tim, and thanks everybody for joining in on Thursday evening. Hoping this is the dessert. Let's assume this is the dessert to your meal, hopefully. Anyhow, so let me begin with some semantics. The participants in our program are called Corps members, members of the Corps. So just so you're aware, a little bit of history about myself. I ran the Milwaukee Community Service Corps for 12 years during the late 90s and into the 2000s, and then went on to found the Great Lakes Community Conservation Corps. Little history of the Corps movement. Back in the 30s, the CCC was run as military camps, and that'll be important when I talk about the Veterans Corps a little bit later. Hopefully I'll remember that. But in any case, I came to learn, and I'll share with you a little bit more on that as well, that the young men, predominantly young men, were in these camps, and the camps were run military style. And then there was, when World War II broke out, there was this natural progression into the war, into the military. And how do I know that? Well, yes, I could have read it in books, and it would probably been some fact that would have drifted through my mind. But in 2008 marked the 75th anniversary of the Civilian Conservation Corps as I marked it, and recognized it in the greater Milwaukee area. So there was a bill that was signed back in, I believe it was February of whatever year that was, 19 blah blah blah, and so 2008, 1933, marked the 75th anniversary, and we as a Corps, we're part of a national organization of service and conservation corps. There are about 130 of us throughout the country. And we meet annually. We share best practices. It's very collegial. There's some great work being done. When you look at the forest fires out west, a number of the corps are involved there. I mean, there are corps all over the country doing great work. And so I personally hold the CCC near and dear as the grandfather of the Corps movement, so to speak. And so in 2008.
So, Chris, if you're on this, I apologize, but I know you have some slides, so I don't know if anything of what you're saying corresponds to slides, but just a reminder to share your screen.
Good prompt there. Thank you.
Yep.
That's probably better. So, so in 2008, I had reached out to a number of the state and local agencies and asked what they were doing for the 75th anniversary. And everybody kind of pointed this way and said, yeah, if there's something going on, we'd like to participate. And so nobody took the lead, but we did. And so I found myself going into the homes of the actual alumni from the CCC. And it was remarkable. It was life-changing for me to hear their stories. At the time, while I was running the Milwaukee Community Service Corps, we were somewhat parochial to Milwaukee. There was plenty of need, and I'll talk about demographics in just a second, but there was no shortage of work in an urban environment. But in going to some of these, call it old timers homes, they were asking, why isn't there something like this in my community or in my neighborhood? And these neighborhoods were in Port Washington, they were in Waukesha, they were in Racine, Kenosha, they were all over southeastern Wisconsin. And so that was really the genesis for the start of Great Lakes Community Conservation Corps, or Great Lakes CCC as we prefer to be known. A little bit about who is in the Corps. So back then in the 30s, it was about unemployment and the young men joining the CCC and sending money back to their families, living in these camp settings. And so the similar situation continues today, at least in our organization, where we focus primarily as an urban youth corps. So we're recruiting from urban neighborhoods, working with typically young adults who are chronically unemployed and or undereducated. Many did not complete high school. And so we operate in a crew-based manner. Personally, or I should say for our organization, we mirror the CCC of then, where the Corps members would go out and do work projects, as you'll see in the slides. And then there was a component set aside for learning, for education. And so they would come back into the classroom. The AmeriCorps program, if you've heard of that, is a derivative of this evolution of service and conservation corps over the decades. And so AmeriCorps generally says about 4 days out of the week should be out in the field doing things, and 1 day out of the week should be training. And so we formalized all of that into an alternative high school, premised on a series of industry credentials. So for example, we partner with the U.S. Bureau of Land Management, and we use their training program for chainsaw certification. That's one of many short courses that we have, and all of those are folded into a curriculum that captures the core standards of the state of Wisconsin, and also is able to account for the credits related to the completion of those vocational courses. So we really set up our core members as students for learning to capitalize on credentials and certifications. And so that's the classroom piece. And I really want to talk about, when we talk about the Tree Army reboot, where we are and where we're taking that, the opportunities for service, and really to make a difference and to be a pioneer for our community. And by that, what I mean is we want to place our young adults, our core members, onto projects that are using either emerging technology or are projects that are going to change the fabric of the community. That might be the landscape, it might be overall community development, things of that nature. We want to be there because we want our core members to feel that sense of pride and investment, and to carry on that legacy to their generations. So, so when you look at diversity, you know, I'll share the contrasts between then and now. And one of those, for example, is the diversity that is inherent in the Great Lakes CCC. So I'm going to walk you through some slides and then expand on a little bit more on the field projects and some of the directions that we're going. But it all falls within that premise of how do we place young adults who may be viewed as at risk and move them into opportunities that may be considered privileged opportunities, meaning, wow, would I like to be involved in this type of project, or give me an electric vehicle to practice on for my driving permit or something of that nature. So that's what I mean by privilege. How are we able to take advantage of our partnerships in the community, and the fact that we have this labor pool or this standing army of young adults with tremendous might and tremendous potential to transform their community. So again, contrasts in the photos that you're about to see, power equipment, right? Then versus now. I mentioned chainsaws and the chainsaw training. We also are, you know, in the end, our goal is to marry the idea of conservation and service to the community with employment and productivity, becoming productive citizens and contributing citizens to their community. So we're always looking at the links between what we're doing in the field and either bona fide occupational qualifications or barriers that may be certificates or other things like that, middle skill credentials that may prevent somebody from either entering or moving up. And so when I talk further about equipment, we have a course that we call heavy operating equipment, and we're talking about forklift, skid steer, backhoe, front end loader, and giving young people a chance to get on those, you know, those old my era Tonka toys, to get onto some of those types of equipment, yellow iron, as they say. And so that's the goal, to give them that opportunity. So again, just start to see some of the differences. And I'll cover more on that. Similarities, backbreaking, labor-intensive work that our crews are involved with. And so, you know, we rely on the youth, I can say that now, on the youth and the spring in their step and the flexibility in their back and the might in their arms, to be able to make physical changes. Some of the slides that you see here are from, go back a few years to the fish passage, clearing of debris from the Milwaukee River in Ozaki County to allow fish passage. And again, I'll talk more about that, but just as I'll allude to the fact that we're trying to, with our name Great Lakes CCC, we're trying to do as many projects or get involved in as many aspects of conservation, preservation, improvement of Lake Michigan and its tributaries as we can. So again, I'll come back to that in a little while. Again, you see a lot of the similarities with conservation, trail development, and overall physical labor. That's really what we're involved with. It's about getting your hands dirty. Similar projects. This is the project you see us working on here was essentially cutting down and removing. It was working with MMSD, which is the Metropolitan Milwaukee Sewerage District, and the cattails would break free and they would clog up the drainage ditches, and so it was our task to remove it. Fish passage, a little bit more in terms of the rocks and other debris that falls down and prevents fish passage, and we were getting in there to clear that out. So that's what you're seeing. And again, all of this should kind of engender this sense of commonality or continuity. And our mission includes a statement that we're dedicated to preserving the legacy of the CCC, and so part of that is about doing these types of projects that those crews did way back when. Similar situations, similar projects, and again, physical in nature. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and come back. So that's just to give you a little bit of what was and what is. So let me talk about how it's changed over time. Part of our mantra is all about disaster response. So we've taken, whether it's CDL, whether it's heavy equipment operation, whether it's hazardous waste operations, lead abatement, asbestos removal, all of those things we tie together as disaster response. And so that's the message that we use with our core members, that we're preparing them to be able to serve their community in times of a disaster. And that reinforces or provides some perspective and relationship to everything, to all these short courses that seem unrelated, but when brought together in that context, a tornado hits or Hurricane Katrina strikes, and we need to clean up, and there are contaminants in the water that people are walking through. We need to do search and rescue. We need to adhere to incident command systems. All of those things can be looked at under disaster response. And so to a core member who has had challenges in life and challenges with employment and challenges with education, we take it then as an asset-based approach that, when disaster strikes, we're going to need somebody who can ship in or truck in water or food or donations. And when those donations, so you're going to need a CDL to be able to drive that truck, or you're going to need a class, I think it's category P, or for bus drivers, passenger vehicle, to be able to evacuate those who have access and mobility impairments or challenges. And when those donations arrive, you'll need to sort those donations out logically and in an efficient manner. So all of those are, again, short courses, all framed within a context of disaster response. And that is the continuity, or the look back, you could say, to the CCC. Whereas the CCC members went into the military, we're kind of bringing that into our modern day core as disaster response. And as you see by the nightly news, there certainly appears to be no shortage of that. So that's probably a good jumping off point to talk about the types of projects that we're working on. Certainly, as you saw in the photos, conservation remains a big part of what we do, and there's huge needs for it. Invasive species removal, terrestrial invasive species removal, I should say, on public lands, green space improvement and maintenance, those things were done then and continue now. Back then, the whole idea of, for example, the tree army and creating forests and building public infrastructure in our community in southeastern Wisconsin, particularly in Milwaukee County. Whitnell Park and the Berner Botanical Gardens are located on a development project by the CCC. They had a big role in constructing that. And so those types of conservation initiatives still stand. Every day we have crews. So let me pause and tell you how we operate, what our operating structure looks like. So a young person comes into our registers to come into our program. It's paid training. We co-enroll them into a variety of programs for credentialing and certification, including the AmeriCorps program. So they become an AmeriCorps member. What does that mean? Well, it means that not only do they receive a stipend on a biweekly basis, but they get a scholarship for college funding. And for that CDF student, historically, that's a pretty big deal, and actually unaware, kind of a diamond in the rough, if you will, because college has been the furthest thing from their mind in many cases. But they enroll, and then they get placed onto a crew. And that crew then is deployed all throughout southeastern Wisconsin. So the unique, I should say, aspect about Great Lakes CCC is that it goes to where unique experiences can be obtained. So for example, we have a campus in Racine, and Racine and nearby Kenosha are experiencing significant bluff erosion. And so that's a focus of ours at the moment, one of many, and what role what can we do to slow that down and to help, to play a role. On the other hand, in the northern reach of southeastern Wisconsin, in Ozaukee County and Washington County, there are islands, federal islands in the Milwaukee River. And so, as I mentioned, we have a partnership with the Bureau of Land Management, which manages those federal lands. And it's an incredibly unique experience for us to be able to either wade across the water to the island, or canoe or boat or whatever method of transportation to be able to get there, and then to manage and maintain that. That kind of micro environment, if you will, the islands, open up an entirely new world to our students who oftentimes, or I should say to our core members who are also students who may have never been in that part of the state, outside of their urban environment, never have had that opportunity. So depending on the experience or the service project, that dictates where we want to go. And it's a combination of service, pro bono service, as well as fee and contract service at times. As an example, most recently, we were involved in a debris jam removal project. A debris jam is essentially in a tributary, logs and other debris washes down, and then eventually Jenga's up, so to speak, if that's the right word, or anti-Jenga, but blocks the passage for fish and water recreation users. So we get called out to assist and remove that, and oftentimes nobody is doing it. There isn't a municipality that has the capacity the time or resources to do that. So we'll send out our crews. And again, it's a unique experience for learning and doing. And that again falls within the paradigm of conservation and carrying on that legacy. With Lake Michigan in our name, as I mentioned, we're looking for everything Lake Michigan based that we can play a role in or that we can assist with. That might be water quality sampling. So for example, in the southern half of southeastern Wisconsin, namely Racine and Kenosha, the areas that are viewed as informal beaches are not sampled, yet they're still swimmable areas. So when we talk about beach closings and water quality, if those areas aren't monitored, so we take that on, we adopt those areas, and our core members sample. We partner with the local health department, which analyzes the E. coli levels, and then we are able to communicate that to anyone and everyone. So that's one example. I talked about bluffs, fish passage. Again, when we talk about debris jams, any role that we can play, restoration. In Racine, for example, they've done a really good job. The health department in Racine has done a really good job with restoring the beaches with native species to prevent erosion and to prevent stormwater runoff. And so we've had a hand in that throughout, whether that's planting or maintaining or enhancing with bluebird boxes or installing boardwalks. So those are examples of some of the ways that we've gotten involved with Lake Michigan. Tim alluded to the fact earlier about Asian carp. So, if it's an issue that is on our minds collectively, we, the Corps, would like to be involved and have a role to assist. If it is an issue that needs to be addressed, we'd like to be there. And so Asian carp was at the time when Tim and I first talked a few years ago, was getting a lot of attention, and so we took an active role in informing the community and really getting the word out as best as we were able within our venues. But it gave us another way to stay involved in everything and anything related to the Great Lakes. So that's kind of our approach to Lake Michigan. That if something is going on related, what can we do? How can we be a forerunner or a front runner to perhaps pilot initiatives? And oftentimes that might mean we're nimble enough to get a small grant to seed a project, and then from there it might evolve or grow and go in different directions. It's a role that we've played numerous times in the past. Whereas back then it was about public infrastructure, a lot of what we're focused on as well nowadays is what I call public health. So we have a longstanding partnership with the US EPA, particularly for the training related to environmental workforce development and job training in general. And what that means is, for example, we train for the 40-hour health and safety credential, also known as hazardous waste operations and emergency response. So that's a regular part of our training program. And that, again, really equips our core members to be able to step foot literally and figuratively on contaminated property because they've been educated and certified to be able to do so. So to give you an example of how valuable this credential is and the privilege that it opens for our core members, we get calls and inquiries from master's students at UWM, at the local university, and they'd like to participate and obtain this credential because it's all free of charge. We have in-house certified instructors who provide the training. And so what that credential does is it is a requirement to have that credential to be able to work on contaminated properties or properties that have certain limitations or constraints related to them. Brownfields, so a simple way to put it. And so it's appealing also to environmental engineering companies who are also our partners, because we end up providing this labor force at an entry level, and providing the opportunity to skill up that labor force. So we've got that. We do that again under public health lead abatement. I mentioned asbestos abatement as well. So those are some examples of the types of training that we provide to be able to really within the community address hazards that are inherent and cause a public health, public safety issue. Another thing that I would like to touch on is energy. And you heard me mention an EV, electric vehicle. And so years ago, when gas prices were a little higher, when the electric vehicle market wasn't as robust, perhaps you could say, as it is now, we had spoken with some knowledgeable individuals, and we were looking at the emergence of compressed natural gas. So we purchased a CNG, compressed natural gas biofuel vehicle, again with the idea that our core members probably, it is unlikely that they'll have a chance to drive a vehicle, that they'll have a chance to refuel a vehicle like that. And the byproduct is, you know, as we talked about, as I mentioned earlier, if they're training for a CDL, the CNG refueling station is right there in the truck operator area. We're refueling with right alongside semi drivers and other CDL operators, and so it gives a nice chance to have some camaraderie and some dialogue taking place, which is all reinforcing for the development of the young person, for the development of the individual. So so alternative fuel vehicles, we just purchased this year our first electric vehicle, and the idea is that because we also train for solar installation and have done a number of solar installations, and we are written into the Solar Group Buy program in southeastern Wisconsin, which is primarily Racine, Kenosha, and Walworth counties, so that the contractor that's selected for that Group Buy program is required to engage and involve our core members in the installation. And so the idea for us with the linkage between solar and the electric vehicles is to essentially drive the development of a constellation of solar EV electric vehicle charging stations throughout southeastern Wisconsin, and particularly in the communities where we work. And the idea then is that when we park near projects, we could plug in, complete the project while we're working for the next 8 hours, and then come back and have a fully charged vehicle. It's the concept. But nonetheless, it's an example of the opportunity that we see to be able to pioneer and move forward emerging needs and emerging issues relative to renewable energy. The flip side to that is you don't want to install solar if your house leaks like a sieve. So we have a training program as one of many certifications that I alluded to for energy auditor. And so at this moment, we're teaming with a specialist, a contractor, who serves as a consultant or a coach to lead our core members into homes where they do energy audits. We've targeted a neighborhood on the north side of Milwaukee, and we've partnered with the community organization that oversees that, and we're implementing what we call the Green Zone Initiative. And essentially it is ideally conducting energy audits on the homes in a perfect world on every home within that neighborhood, so that there's awareness and education about where there are leaks taking place, so that those can be resolved or remediated. And then we can get to the idea of adding renewable energy to be able to reduce carbon emissions, right? So that's an example. The last thing I want to leave you with before I open it or hear any of Tim's questions is what I refer to as the Veterans Corps. So there have been a handful of service and conservation corps throughout the country that essentially dedicated a crew to veterans who are transitioning into civilian life. And we were prompted by that through one of our Corps members who was involved or who had experience at the VA, the Zablocki VA in Milwaukee, and who saw that many of the credentials and certifications and education that we provide to our Corps members, to our young adults, were valuable in the marketplace. And you heard me say that we get master's students who call us up. So the idea was, could that be extended to veterans, to military veterans? So we spent about 2 years in the planning stages, and just recently rolled out the Veterans Corps. And so that in and of itself is moving in multiple directions, working with homeless veterans, working in rural areas, kind of along the food supply chain, looking at best practices with farming and agricultural land management. So that's the latest direction that we're moving as a Corps, and that has had some just fascinating ramifications. To be able to bring together young adults who may have been chronically unemployed with perhaps veterans who may be in or may have experienced a similar situation, and where the overlays occur. So that's been just remarkable to see. And I could expand on that. That's another webinar for another day, but it is just fascinating. So having said that, the Veterans Corps kind of closes the loop, if you will, to the overall Tree Army and the CCC from yesteryear, when they were working under a military style approach and on the camps. And now we see that we have military veterans working in the CCC model. So it's kind of neat to see and experience. That's pretty much all I have to say and ramble on. Tim?
Awesome. Thank you very much, Chris. So I know it looks like you guys have all been holding on to your questions and you haven't put anything into the chat. So I would encourage you to put some questions in the chat. And I guess in the meantime, Chris, it sounds like you covered a handful of different things that the Great Lakes CCC is involved with. What's an area that you wish the Corps was involved in but isn't quite yet engaged in that topic?
You know, we are demographically, we've been primarily, I'd like to see a greater presence in underrepresented communities. And so, for example, our Milwaukee campus is located on the north side of Milwaukee. For anybody who's familiar with Milwaukee, the Menominee Valley is a physical dividing line to the communities on the south side. And so we're looking at that to set up another campus on the south side, again with the idea that the credentials that we provide are for high demand occupations. And so you know, a CDL is really a golden ticket to gainful employment. So that's our concept to be in those communities. And, the other piece too is, Tim, is that because we also do, I left out the fact that we do community development, construction, affordable housing. We have crews that are at times building, rehabbing, working with other, learning, I should say, from other contractors, and providing, serving a vital role. I'd like to see us kind of along the main streets with a presence in various communities. Not a huge footprint, but a footprint nonetheless on main streets. So look for that in the future. It's part of our overall long-term strategic plan.
We'll definitely be on the lookout for it, Chris. So, okay, we got some good questions from our attendees. So this one's from Sylvia. First, thank you for the delightful webinar, and have a couple of questions. So what are some of the short-term and long-term goals of the Corps? What have been some challenges? And then specifically, has the pandemic presented any specific challenges for the Corps?
Yeah, good. So short-term goals, we spend a lot of time managing logistics. And so if we have a crew or crews in Racine and we need to run, we're always on the lookout for valuable projects that have meaning. And so I think I would lump that into short-term goals that we're constantly feeding the machine, meaning we have this army and they need to be doing something, and they need to be doing something meaningful, and we need to be able to get them there, and we need to be able to train them, and we need to be able to manage them. So those are kind of the day-to-day short-term goals, to really kind of fine-tune that overall. Again, when I think back to being run as a military camp, to me that means there's really strong systems in place, and that really is important. And long-term goals, the vision that we have, and you've heard me allude to this notion of privilege. One of the things that we're working on right now is our International Service Exchange program, and so we've been. The idea is to send our crew or crews overseas to learn and assist and participate, and that is very close. It was supposed to be right now, actually. A year ago, we would have been in the Netherlands at this time, learning about some of their innovation. So the Netherlands still stands, but the whole idea of having young adults who would probably never be able to, or I shouldn't say never, but in their current economic state of unemployment and a lot of other challenges, to be able to facilitate an overseas international trip. We're looking forward to that. So that's one of several long-term goals that we have, but I'm really keenly interested in that. Again, from that perspective of what I call privilege. How do we place our young people into emerging situations and give them opportunities that many others don't have? As a side note, we have a course that we call Global Culture and Relief. And the idea is just that if there is a tsunami that strikes Thailand or Taiwan or wherever it is, that potentially our Corps members could view that as an opportunity to participate and travel overseas. So that course, that short-term course, is about not only awareness, but also helping them. We fund a U.S. passport. So I forgot what the numbers are, like 25% of U.S. citizens ever get a passport. So when you slice and dice that even further by socioeconomic challenges and things like that, so we make that a part of our overall program. Challenges, I often look back and think about how did the CCC get these young adults to work in some really challenging situations. You and I both know young people. I remember my days, and when it's 95 degrees out and I'm supposed to be, doing some heavy labor, wow, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of willpower. And so I think that's a challenge, particularly for young people who have been chronically unemployed, and kind of rotating from job to job or have never had a job. So the whole idea of developing a work ethic, and being able to follow direction and understanding what the bigger picture is, that is our challenge, and our biggest challenge, I think. And what we find is when we can, it's really about that transformation of the individual. And when that individual transforms and kind of catches the wave of the norming of our culture, of the core, they really take off. And so I was telling Tim earlier, we have a graduation ceremony tomorrow for our school, for our alternative high school. But some of those students have already transitioned into become AmeriCorps members with us for a short-term period of time while they transition into college or university setting. And the last thing you mentioned is, has the pandemic, how has that affected us? The main challenge that we have is that, first of all, with that backbone of 130 youth service and conservation corps, best practices are shared among all of them. So the California Conservation Corps, that's a state-run organization. It's huge. And so it has the capacity and the knowledge to be able to develop really strong policies, and to be able to share those out. Similarly, the Los Angeles Conservation Corps is a $50 million organization. So they've got the ability to pull things together, and we then can glean best practices for a COVID-19 preparedness plan. One of those best practices is vehicles and transportation. And so that's key to us. The number of seats really governs the size of our program. And therefore, what we've seen is a reduction per vehicle of approximately at least 50%, which means we need to double the size of our fleet and double the number of our staffing to be able to maintain the same organization size, the same number of corps members. And that has been challenging. That is one additional layer in terms of jockeying vehicles and overall logistics that we're dealing with on a regular basis.
So next up, we have a question from Haley. And so this organization is called the Great Lakes CCC, but does it only serve Southeast Wisconsin? And are there other conservation corps in the Great Lakes region, and specifically Northern Wisconsin?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Haley, there are other corps around the Great Lakes, and there is I'm going to digress a bit to share with you that there are contaminated harbors and areas around the Great Lakes known as areas of concern. They're designated by the EPA, and so the Great Lakes CCC has been trying to string together all of these youth corps, or all of these service and conservation corps that are serving particularly the coastal areas around the Great Lakes, to unite them in a more of a regional effort. And we call that the Great Lakes Coastal Corps Compact, Corps as in CORPS. And so yes, there are a number of other ones, and they're all kind of doing their own thing. But the goal would be, and has been, to try to unite everyone together. In northwestern Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin, interestingly enough, in the UP, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, there is another program, another corps called the Great Lakes Conservation Corps, Great Lakes CC. So there are corps operating, and I will tell you one last thing. The Wisconsin Conservation Corps, which was defunded, but was active throughout the 90s and for decades, they did work throughout the state. and in a crew-based manner, working with and sharing Corps members from different regions. I'm on my way this coming week up to Cable, and there's a concrete pad where there's a picnic table in a park that I'll frequently visit, and I see the engravings of those Corps members that put that together from the Milwaukee area, from southeastern Wisconsin, and from throughout the state as well. So yes, there are Corps that are active, not that many, unfortunately. And I know there's been a push to bring back the Wisconsin Conservation Corps. We'll see, fingers crossed.
So a question from Olivia. It's kind of a question, but I guess I'm interested in any stories and photos you can share from underrepresented communities in northern Wisconsin and the South Shore of Lake Superior, if you have any.
I don't. If I come across some, I will definitely let you know. I think my contact information may be available through this, or you could get it through Tim. But yeah, I'd be happy to do so. And the Minnesota-Iowa Conservation Corps is operating right there in Duluth Superior area. So that might be an opportunity as well to be able to get some information relative to northern Wisconsin.
So we got a comment from Mike. Great work, Chris. And it's a very valuable experience for the Corps member. I just wanted to share a story about part of some CCC history that they helped dig 55 acres of lagoons at the Wildlife Sanctuary in Green Bay during the Depression. And a family shared how this work enabled their 70-year-old great-grandfather to put food on the table during that time period. So pretty cool story there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel that connection, Mike, when I travel around the state. And I was on a bike ride across Wisconsin. I think it was around the Dells, where there's a statue that the DNR had or somebody had placed up of a CCC member. And it's so moving, and it is a legacy. And as you mentioned, the idea was that the Corps members had to send money back home, and it was of vital importance. The alumni that I met, it changed their lives, and it was so moving that it really moved me. Like I said, to create the Great Lakes CCC, and it was an experience that I'll never forget. And those individuals are gone now. That was the proverbial greatest generation, and it was a moment in time, and I'm so fortunate to be able to have had audience with them.
So Chris, I think you might have just answered this question, but could you maybe talk a little bit more about what led you to this type of work? Or I guess maybe you just answered the Great Lakes CCC part of it.
So my background is actually in construction and real estate development. And at the time, I grew up in Milwaukee, and my father was an architect, and my parents were divorced, and my father would move to neighborhoods in Milwaukee that were always on the rise. And so I was residing with him throughout high school, and that became ingrained. How does this work? There's so much potential here. How do we extend that throughout the city of Milwaukee? And so I would ask my professors that in the real estate development program, and nobody could seem to crack the code on gentrification. And then by happenstance, I went to I got involved with the Milwaukee Community Service Corps, and what you had happening there, and in Corps in general, is you have young adults from underrepresented populations and geographic areas and communities who are doing the work in those communities and making them better. And then, by extension, with those job skills, they're employable, and they're employable in middle skill occupations. So then they become homeowners that seed those neighborhoods, and that was the magic that I found. That was the answer that no one could give me at the academic level or within any of the journals that I was, searching out that answer, and it was right there. It was, if you can engage young people to make the change, to be the change makers, and to invest their blood, sweat, and tears in those communities where they reside, and then skill them up to become employable, you're not going to have that. That was the issue that I was running into. How do we prevent that whole idea of, well, if I skill you up, you're just going to move out of that neighborhood and into somewhere else. But what we were finding was that the young people who were invested in investing themselves within those communities were continuing to seed those communities for future generations. And but anyhow, that's how I became enamored with the whole core movement. And my peers are building or had built subdivisions in Florida and insurance towers and whatever, and I just fell in love with the core movement.
It'd be hard not to with that experience.
Mm-hmm.
So a few other, so first off, I know that it is 8 o'clock, and I think that's when we said we would end. We just have a few other questions, but I do want to give people an out if they want to take off. Otherwise, Chris, if you're willing, we could just finish up these few other questions.
Absolutely.
So I think from Mike, is there any chance of getting the state to fund the CCC again?
So almost every year for the past 5 years, at least, so often led by Corey Mason, who is now the mayor of Racine, but when he was a state legislator, he was pushing bipartisan legislation to get that state core funded again. And it's been challenging. So I hope to see it, and we're trying to do our part. Mainly, what do I mean by that? Well, if we can do projects throughout the region, regardless of whether it's blue or red community or galvanized that way, we're hoping that we can make change, and change by visibility. Change meaning the young people who are making that change to improve the communities are themselves diverse, and so they're leaving a value to that community, to those homeowners. So that's, we hope to play that role, but there's a lot of challenges taking place, within the state, and we'll see.
So Sylvia, I think I might need a little help on your question of what was the name of the course again. I'm guessing maybe it was, I don't know if it was an initial original CCC course that you based some of your training materials off of, if I'm remembering that. Global culture.
Oh,
maybe?
No, yeah, that's really a back end way to give our core members passports.
Yep. Which is a great idea. Be a great experience. And then I think the last question is just how can we all help or get involved or support some of the Great Lakes CCC work?
Yeah, I think start by reaching out to volunteer, either time. I mean, when we look across and say, okay, resources, well, sure, you can donate, absolutely. But even more than that, your presence, or the presence of an adult who is assisting and doing the same thing that our core members are doing, really sends a strong message that the work is important. It's so important that these adults are taking time out of their adult world to assist us. So that has tremendous value and impact in the transformation of young adults. And remember, that's what the CCC was all about, right? You had, back then, you had so many unemployed, perhaps undereducated as well. And that's where we're at today, where we're continuing on working with those young adults who who may be unemployed or lack certain credentials and have barriers to employment. So the whole idea of kind of the wraparound of the individual in terms of support and confidence is really key, I think, for the overall progress of our community. So, good question.
So I'm not seeing anything else in the chat. I'll give it another few seconds just in case if there's any last minute questions. Otherwise, I just want to thank all of the participants for hanging out with us tonight. And thank you very much, Chris, for that great presentation and telling us a little bit more about the Great Lakes CCC. And if we were all in person, you'd hear a very loud applause and cheering, and we'd probably be raising our glasses to you as well. So
sounds great. I'll take that. Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, well, looks like there are no more questions. So yep, thanks everyone. And I guess stay tuned to the Sea Grant social media feeds for our next Lake Talk, which I think is sometime next month. So thanks everyone. Have a good night.